You tell anyone and you're dead, cop tells biker's son. Then 200 Hell's Angels him. He wasn't involved in the crazy biker life of his father, Jake, who was a longtime member of the Hell's Angels, a notorious motorcycle club known for its strength and power. To Danny, his father was just a man trying to survive in a world that didn't understand them, always riding his Harley, keeping to himself, and often coming home late at night. But Danny, despite knowing a little about the life his father led, didn't think much of it. He wasn't part of it.
Steady.
He just lived a normal life, school, hanging out with friends, and trying to figure out who he was. One Friday afternoon, everything changed. It was a usual school day, and the air had that crisp feel to it, the kind of weather that made you want to grab a jacket and stroll around town. As the bell rang, signaling the end of school, Danny packed his things slowly, dragging his feet. He wasn't in any hurry to get home. He'd grown used to walking alone after school. His friends had all started to go their separate ways, leaving him with time to think. As he made his way out of the school gates, his phone buzzed in his pocket. It was a text from his dad. "Hey, meet me at the diner after school." "Got something to talk about," Danny frowned. His father rarely sent texts, and he couldn't remember the last time they had sat down together for a meal. Something was different, but Danny couldn't place it. He decided to head straight to the diner, figuring it would be a good time to grab a bite and talk. When Danny walked into the diner, it was just as he expected. The usual faces were scattered around, sipping coffee and chatting about nothing in particular. The place had a warmth to it, an old-fashioned charm with its booths lined up along the walls and a jukebox humming softly in the background. But as he stepped further in, Danny felt his stomach tighten. Sitting in the back booth, all alone, was a man Danny didn't recognize, a police officer in uniform, his dark sunglasses resting on the table. He was staring at the door, waiting. Danny paused for a moment, not sure what to think. It wasn't common to see police officers around, especially not just sitting at a booth in a local diner. His eyes darted to the counter where his dad usually sat, but there was no sign of him. The officer glanced up and gave a small, almost knowing smile, but Danny didn't return it. Something about this man unsettled him. He wasn't sure why, but his instincts told him to be cautious. "Take a seat, kid," the officer said, motioning to the booth across from him. Danny hesitated, his mind racing, but his feet carried him forward without thinking. He slid into the booth, trying to remain calm. The officer's gaze never left him, and it made Danny feel like a piece of meat under a microscope. "Where's my dad?" Danny asked, his voice a bit louder than he intended. The officer didn't answer right away. He picked up his coffee, took a slow sip, and set the cup back down with a soft clink. "Your dad's busy. I'm sure he'll be here soon," he said with a half smirk. Danny felt his stomach drop. Something wasn't right. His father had never been this late before, and the officer's tone felt off, like he was trying to say something without actually saying it. "Who are you?" Danny asked, trying to keep his voice steady. He had heard rumors of corrupt officers in the town, but he'd never thought much of it. Still, the feeling in the pit of his stomach was growing stronger by the second. The officer finally spoke, his voice low and almost too calm. "Doesn't matter who I am. What matters is what I've got to say to you." He leaned forward slightly, locking eyes with Danny. "I know you're probably scared right now, but listen closely. There's something you need to understand." Danny's heart began to race. "What are you talking about?" The officer's lips curled into a thin smile, though his eyes remained cold. "You're smart, kid. You know who I am and you know what your father does. You've probably seen things, heard things, things you shouldn't have. And let me tell you something. There are people in this town who don't take kindly to loose lips." Danny's mind scrambled to make sense of what the officer was implying. He thought of the stories he'd heard about his father's friends, the men who always had strange looks in their eyes and whose bikes roared through the streets late at night. He thought of the whispered rumors, the ones about his father and his involvement in things that went far beyond just riding motorcycles. "What do you want from me?" Danny managed to ask, his voice trembling slightly. The officer's gaze hardened. "I'm going to give you a simple choice. You keep your mouth shut and nothing happens. You say anything, anything at all, and I'll make sure it's the last thing you ever say." His voice was a quiet whisper, but the threat was clear in every syllable. Danny sat frozen, the weight of the officer's words sinking in like a heavy stone. He didn't know how to respond. He had no idea what he had seen or heard that could be so important, so dangerous, but the officer's words echoed in his ears. and he knew it wasn't a joke. Danny didn't say anything. He couldn't. The officer leaned back in his seat, seemingly satisfied with the silence. "You understand me, kid?" Danny nodded slowly, his mind racing. He didn't know if he understood, but he knew one thing for sure: this was no ordinary cop. He wasn't just some officer trying to keep the peace. There was something darker about him, something sinister. But as much as Danny wanted to get up and walk out, something held him back. The officer's smile returned, but it was different now. It wasn't friendly or reassuring. It was a warning, a threat wrapped in a smile. "Good," he said. "Now go home and remember what I said." Without saying another word, the officer stood up, leaving a few bills on the table for his coffee. He walked out of the diner, leaving Danny alone with his thoughts. He sat there for a moment, his hands shaking slightly as he tried to process everything that had just happened. His mind raced, but the only thing he could focus on was the last thing the officer had said. "If you say anything, you're dead." Danny didn't know what to do. His father had never warned him about anything like this. He had never spoken of the dangers that came with the life he led. But now, sitting in that empty booth, Danny realized that the world he had known was far more complicated, more dangerous than he had ever imagined. The door to the diner opened, and Danny looked up, hoping it was his father. But it was. It was just a couple of regular customers, chatting and laughing like everything was normal. Danny sat there, lost in his thoughts, his hands still trembling. He had to talk to his dad. He had to figure out what to do. But for now, all he could do was sit there, wondering if the officer's words would follow him for the rest of his life. And so, the quiet town, with its ordinary streets and small-town charm, suddenly seemed a lot darker. The danger was real, and it wasn't just about his father's past. It was about his own future now. Danny couldn't help but wonder what was going to happen next. But one thing was clear. He couldn't escape this world, no matter how hard he tried. The days after the meeting with the officer dragged on like a weight pressing down on Danny's chest. He couldn't shake the feeling that everything in his life had just shifted, and not in a good way. The officer's words replayed over and over in his mind, each time sounding darker, more menacing. "You tell anyone and you're dead." The more Danny thought about it, the more the threat seemed real. He wasn't sure why, but deep down he felt that this wasn't just some idle warning. It felt like a promise, one that could turn his world upside down if he wasn't careful. Danny tried to act normal. He went to school, did his homework, and hung out with his few remaining friends, but it was all an act. His mind wasn't there. His thoughts kept drifting back to that officer, to the danger that seemed to be closing in on him. But he didn't know what to do with this new information. Who could he talk to? His father? Would his dad even believe him? Jake, his father, was always a man of few words. He was quiet, strong, and often kept to himself. It wasn't that Jake didn't love his son. It was just that his life as a member of the Hells Angels had created a distance between them. Danny never felt truly a part of his father's world. He had grown up knowing that his father was different, not just because of the tattoos and the leather jacket, but because of the lifestyle he led. It was a world full of secrets, things Danny had never fully understood or even asked about. And now, after what the officer had said, Danny wasn't sure he ever wanted to. That night after dinner, Danny was sitting on the front porch, staring out into the quiet street. His father had been late, as usual, and there had been no mention of the diner or the officer. It was like the meeting hadn't even happened. But Danny couldn't forget it. He didn't know how much time had passed before his dad finally pulled into the driveway, the sound of his Harley echoing through the empty streets. Jake got off his bike and took off his helmet, wiping the sweat from his forehead. He looked tired, like he hadn't slept in days, but he always did after a long ride. "Hey, Danny," he said, his voice gruff but not unkind. "How's your day?" Danny wanted to tell him everything. He wanted to open up, to share the terrifying conversation with the officer, but he didn't know how to begin. Instead, he just shrugged and said, "Fine, just school stuff." Jake raised an eyebrow but didn't push. He probably figured something was up, but he didn't press. That was how their relationship had always been: unspoken understandings and silences that spoke volumes. Danny didn't want to add to his dad's stress. Jake had enough on his plate already, between the club and whatever else he was involved in. But as the hours passed and the house grew quieter, Danny couldn't shake the feeling of unease. The officer's threat lingered like a shadow over everything. He kept seeing that smile, that cold, calculating smile. It made his skin crawl. What if the officer wasn't lying? What if something terrible would happen if Danny told anyone? The fear gnawed at him. He thought of his friends, of how they would never understand if he tried to explain. He didn't want to live in constant fear, but it felt like that was his only choice. He didn't even know what he was protecting. What had he seen that could be so dangerous? His thoughts were jumbled, a storm of confusion and worry. For the next few days, Danny tried to ignore the growing sense of dread. He kept going through the motions, getting up in the morning, walking to school, pretending like everything was normal. But nothing felt normal anymore. The world outside seemed unchanged, but Danny could feel the difference inside him. He was carrying a burden he couldn't shake off, a secret that threatened to consume him. Then, one afternoon, Danny walked into the living room to find his dad sitting in the armchair, staring at the TV, but his eyes were distant. Jake hadn't said much in the past few days, but Danny could tell something was bothering him. His dad looked exhausted, like he hadn't slept at all. Danny hesitated before sitting down beside him, unsure of how to start the conversation. "Dad," Danny said, his voice low. "Is everything okay?" Jake didn't look at him right away. He took a deep breath as though weighing his words carefully before he spoke. "Things have been complicated," he said, finally meeting Danny's eyes. "There's a lot going on, more than you know." Danny felt a knot form in his stomach. He had wanted to ask more, to press for answers, but his dad's words only raised more questions. What was going on? Why did Jake ever talk to him about any of this? "Is it about the club?" Danny asked, almost afraid to hear the answer. Jake hesitated, then nodded. "Some things are better left alone, Danny," he said quietly. "Some things you don't need to know, not yet." Danny was silent, trying to process his father's words. It wasn't like Jake to be so cryptic. There was a lot going on in the background, things Danny wasn't privy to, but it didn't explain the officer or the threat he had given him. It didn't explain why Danny was suddenly caught in a web of lies and danger he couldn't escape from. The next day, Danny couldn't stop thinking about the officer's warning. It was like the walls were closing in on him. He knew he couldn't keep carrying this secret forever, but who could he turn to? The police were out of the question, not after the officer had threatened him. His father's world was full of dangers and secrets, and Danny wasn't sure he wanted to know what lay behind the curtain. It wasn't until that evening, when Danny was walking home from school, that something happened that finally pushed him to his breaking point. As he passed by the old corner store, he saw a group of men standing outside. They were talking quietly, but the moment Danny walked into view, they stopped and stared at him. Danny recognized one of them. It was a member of his father's club. The man's eyes met Danny's for a moment, then quickly shifted away. Something was off. Danny didn't know why, but he had the strange feeling that they had been talking about him. He kept walking, trying to act casual, but the unease in his chest was growing. He didn't know what it meant, but he knew it wasn't good. Maybe it was just paranoia, but the tension in the air felt too real to ignore. Later that night after dinner, Danny found himself sitting in his room, staring out the window. His mind was racing, trying to figure out his next move. He knew he couldn't keep living like this in fear of what might happen. He couldn't stay silent forever. Just then, his phone buzzed. It was a text from a number he didn't recognize. His heart skipped a beat as he opened the message. It was simple. "We need to talk. Meet us at the diner." Danny's breath caught in his throat. He didn't know who had sent the message, but his gut told him it was important. He couldn't ignore it. He needed answers, and he needed them now. Danny couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. The text had come at the worst possible time, and he had no idea who it was from. But as he stared at the glowing screen in his hands, one thing became clear. He couldn't ignore it. The message was simple, direct, and it left him with no choice but to go. "We need to talk. Meet us at the diner." The diner again, the same place where everything had started. The place where the officer had threatened him, where he had felt the weight of the world pressing down on his shoulders. A knot tightened in Danny's stomach, but he didn't know what else to do. He could stay home, ignore it, but the fear of the unknown gnawed at him. What if this was his only chance to get answers? He glanced at the clock on his nightstand. It was already dark outside, and his father, Jake, hadn't come home yet. It was just another night of the same, Jake coming back late from whatever business he was involved in, never talking much about it, leaving Danny with more questions than answers. Danny's dad had always been distant, but now it felt like the distance had grown. The weight of the officer's warning still hung over him, and tonight Danny knew he couldn't wait any longer. Taking a deep breath, Danny grabbed his jacket, stuffed his phone into his pocket, and made his way out the door. The air outside was crisp, the kind of chill that made you want to pull your collar up and hurry on your way. The walk to the diner wasn't long, just a few blocks down the road, but with each step, Danny's nerves grew. He couldn't help but feel like he was walking into something he wasn't ready for. When he arrived at the diner, it was quiet. The soft hum of the jukebox played in the background, and the usual buzz of conversation was absent. Only a few customers sat at the counter, their conversations low and unimportant. But there in the back booth sat two men Danny didn't recognize. They were both dressed in leather jackets, their faces hidden behind the shadows of the dim lighting. Danny hesitated at the door. Something about the scene felt wrong. He had come here for answers, but now, looking at these strangers, he wasn't so sure. The hairs on the back of his neck stood up, and he took a step back. But before he could turn around, one of the men noticed him. "Danny," the man called, his voice low and gruff. "You came." Danny froze. How did they know his name? His mind raced, but his feet carried him forward. He had no choice now. Slowly, he walked toward the booth, his heart pounding in his chest. He could feel their eyes on him, and it made him uncomfortable. But he wasn't going to back down now. He slid into the booth across from them. The men didn't introduce themselves, and Danny didn't ask. He just waited, the silence stretching between them like a thick fog. Finally, one of the men spoke. "You've been keeping a low profile, huh?" The man's tone was casual, but there was an underlying tension in his words. "Smart move." Danny didn't know what to say. He was still processing everything. The officer's warning, the text message, the unfamiliar faces in front of him, it was all too much. "What do you want from me?" Danny finally asked, his voice barely above a whisper. The man who had spoken before leaned forward slightly. "We're here to help you, Danny. Your dad, he's in a tough spot. We're not here to make things harder for you, but we need to know where you stand." Danny frowned. "My dad, what do you mean in a tough spot?" He couldn't hide the confusion in his voice. It was like they were speaking in code, and he didn't know the language. The other man, who had been silent until now, spoke up. "We know about the officer. We know what he said to you. And we know he's been using his position for something far worse than just pulling people over for speeding. But that's not our fight, not yet anyway. What matters now is you. What are you going to do about it?" Danny felt his chest tighten. "I don't know what you're talking about. I don't know what I'm supposed to do." The man sighed, his expression softening just a little. "We don't want to put you in a position you're not ready for. But if you want to help your dad, you need to understand something. This world, the one your father's a part of, isn't the same as the world you've been living in. There are rules, and sometimes those rules don't play by the book." Danny's mind was racing. He had heard the whispers, the rumors about his father's life with the Hell's Angels. But it had always seemed so far removed from him, something that happened outside of their home, outside of their family. Now, sitting in front of these men, it felt like the curtain had been pulled back. The life his father led wasn't just dangerous. It was full of secrets, and those secrets were beginning to spill over into Danny's life. "I don't know if I can do this," Danny admitted, his voice shaking slightly. "I didn't ask for any of this." The man who had first spoken nodded. "We get it, but you don't have a choice. You're already in it, Danny. And the only way out is to stand up and make sure no one uses you as a pawn." Danny's head was spinning. He thought back to the officer, to the threat that still haunted him. "What do you mean, pawn? What's really going on here?" The silence stretched again. The two men exchanged a look, and for a moment Danny thought they weren't going to answer. Then the first man spoke again. "You're not the first one to be caught in the middle of something bigger than you. Your dad has been doing his best to keep things under control. But there's a lot of things he can't protect you from. That officer, he's been making deals with the wrong people, and now your dad's getting pulled into it. You're involved because of who your dad is, but you have a chance to make sure things don't get worse." Danny felt a sinking feeling in his stomach. Everything had felt so out of control already, but now it seemed like he had even less power than before. He was just a teenager, stuck between two worlds that didn't care about him, a kid trying to live a normal life, while his father's past was dragging him into something he couldn't escape. "I don't know what to do," Danny said, his voice barely audible. The second man finally spoke, his voice calm but firm. "You don't have to do anything right now, but you need to be ready. Things are going to escalate, and when they do, you'll have to choose. Do you want to stay silent, or do you want to fight for your father? Because if you don't make a choice, someone else will make it for you." Danny sat there, stunned, unable to process what he had just heard. The weight of the decision was suffocating, and he wasn't sure if he was ready to carry it. "Look," the first man said, standing up. "We'll be in touch, but don't waste time thinking you can just walk away from this. It's bigger than you, and it's bigger than your dad. Just remember, if you don't act, you'll lose everything." With that, the two men left, leaving Danny alone in the booth, his thoughts a whirlwind. He stared down at the table, his hands trembling slightly as he tried to piece everything together. What was his next step? Could he really help his father, or was it already too late? The questions lingered in the air, unanswered, as Danny left the diner that night. The road ahead seemed darker now, and he wasn't sure if he was ready to face it. But one thing was certain, he couldn't go back to the way things were. His life had changed forever, and there was no going back. Danny couldn't stop thinking about the meeting at the diner. The two men, the words they had said, the warning, it all swirled in his mind like a whirlwind. The decision to get involved in his father's world felt like it was no longer his to make. The more he thought about it, the more trapped he felt. He wasn't a part of the Hell's Angels, and yet somehow his life had become tied to it. The officer's threat, the mysterious text, the conversation with the two men, they had all led him here, to a point where there seemed to be no way out. The following days felt like a slow march to something he couldn't see, but knew was coming. The quiet moments in his room, staring out the window at the same streets he had walked 1,000 times, were now filled with a sense of dread. He couldn't escape the feeling that things were getting worse, and he was just waiting for it to all collapse. His dad, Jake, had always kept him at arm's length when it came to his biker life, but Danny realized now that it wasn't just about keeping him out of the danger. It was about protecting him from the dark side of the world Jake had chosen. And now Danny was right in the middle of it, with no way of getting out. One night, as Danny sat on the porch, trying to process everything, he heard the familiar rumble of his dad's motorcycle pulling into the driveway. Jake's Harley always made the same noise as it came up the street, and despite the weight on his shoulders, Danny couldn't help but feel a small sense of relief when he saw his dad dismount from the bike. But there was something different in the way Jake walked toward the house. He looked tired more than usual. His face was drawn, and the weight of the world seemed to rest on his shoulders. Danny didn't wait for his dad to say anything. He stood up and walked toward him. "Dad, we need to talk." Jake looked at him for a long moment, and for the first time in what felt like forever, there was a hint of vulnerability in his eyes. "What about, son?" Danny took a deep breath. "About everything." They stood there for a few moments, the cool night air surrounding them. Jake seemed to weigh his words carefully before speaking. "I've tried to protect you from all of this, Danny. The world I'm in, it's not a safe place, and I didn't want you to know about it, but I guess it's time." Danny's heart raced. This was the moment he had been both dreading and longing for. "I know about the officer," Danny said, his voice quieter than he intended. He threatened me." Jake's eyes darkened at the mention of the officer. "I figured as much. He's been a problem for a while now." "But you don't need to worry about him. You're safe." "I don't feel safe," Danny admitted, his voice shaking. "I'm caught in the middle of all of this, and I don't know what to do. They said I have to choose, but I don't even know what I'm choosing between." Jake sighed, running a hand through his hair. "I should have told you sooner, Danny. This life, it's dangerous, and it's a part of who I am, but it doesn't have to be a part of you. You're young, you've got a chance to live a normal life, and I want that for you. More than anything, I want you to be safe." Danny's chest tightened. "But I can't just ignore everything. I can't pretend it's not happening. They came to me, Dad, the Hell's Angels. They said I have to decide what side I'm on. They said things are going to get worse. I don't know if I can just sit back and do nothing." Jake looked at him for a long time, his face stern, but with a hint of sadness. "I don't want you involved in this life, Danny. I never did, but I understand why you feel like you need to do something. If you want to help, you can, but don't think it's going to be easy." Danny swallowed hard. How do I even begin to help? What am I supposed to do?" Jake took a step forward and placed a hand on his son's shoulder. "It's not about fighting, Danny. It's about protecting what matters. The club, they're not all bad, but there are people in it that don't play by the rules. The officer you're dealing with, he's one of those people, and he's dangerous." Danny nodded, feeling a sense of unease settle deep in his stomach. "I don't know what to believe anymore. I don't know who to trust." "You can trust me," Jake said, his voice steady. "I may not be able to change everything, but I can help guide you through it. We'll figure this out together." The conversation hung in the air, and for the first time, Danny felt a sense of clarity. His father wasn't perfect, but he was trying. He had always kept his distance, but now, with the threat of the officer and the growing danger in town, Jake was showing Danny a side of him he had never seen before. A side that was protective, caring, and full of wisdom. A side that could help him navigate this confusing and terrifying situation. But that clarity didn't last long. The next day, the weight of the decision still lingered over him. He had a conversation with his dad, but now that the reality of it all was setting in, Danny realized just how much was at stake. The officer wasn't the only one they had to worry about. There were others, people in the club, people who wouldn't hesitate to use violence to get what they wanted. And now, Danny was in the middle of it. The pressure was mounting, and every decision he made felt like it would push him further into a world he had never wanted to be a part of. That afternoon, Danny walked to school, his thoughts heavy with uncertainty. He had to figure out what his next move was. Was he supposed to help his father, help the club, or just stay out of it? He knew he couldn't stay neutral forever. As he walked down the street, he passed the corner store again, the same group of men standing outside. This time they didn't look at him, but he couldn't shake the feeling that they knew something he didn't. He felt like they were always watching, always waiting. By the time he reached the school, Danny was mentally exhausted. His mind was spinning with too many thoughts, too many decisions. He sat down in his seat, his hands shaking slightly. It was like he was holding a ticking time bomb in his chest, and he had no idea when it was going to explode. The bell rang, signaling the start of the class, but Danny couldn't focus. All he could think about was the message, the men in the diner, the officer's threat, and his father's warning. He wasn't sure what the future held, but he knew that his life had changed in a way he couldn't take back. Later that evening, Danny sat on the porch again, watching as the sun dipped below the horizon. His father was inside, cleaning his bike like he always did after a long ride. Danny thought about what Jake had said, "If you want to help, you can," but he still didn't know how. How could he protect his father, protect himself, without getting pulled deeper into the mess that had already begun to unfold? As the evening wore on, Danny realized that he wasn't going to get the answers he was looking for right away. This was going to take time. And whatever came next, he would have to face it head-on. There was no turning back. His father had shown him the way forward, but the path was unclear. All he could do was keep moving forward, one step at a time. And with that, Danny knew that his life would never be the same again.